To end their duel that took place during the Battle of Geonosis in Episode 2, Dooku held nothing back in using his significant skills in lightsaber combat to remove Anakin Skywalker's weapon arm, causing serious injury to the Jedi Padawan. While the quick ending to the duel and the method utilized by Dooku would have important consequences for Anakin as the Clone War began, there's another question that needs to be considered. In the novel Labyrinth of Evil, it's revealed that Dooku had long known about his master Darth Sidious' plan to bring Anakin onto the side of the Sith and dark side. So with his apprentice knowing the importance of Anakin to the Sith, how did Sidious react when learning about Anakin's serious injury on Geonosis? Especially when it was possible it could have been avoided in some way, unlike Anakin's later defeat to the Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar. Was Sidious angry that Dooku injured Anakin during the events of Episode 2, and potentially risked his long-term plans for Anakin? There are a few areas within the Legends lore that might demonstrate Sidious was deeply concerned about Anakin's well-being and displeased with Dooku's efforts on Geonosis, suggesting he was angry with what Dooku did to Anakin. Within the novel The Clone Wars Wild Space, likely only a few hours, but certainly not more than a day or two after the Battle of Geonosis, Jedi Grandmaster Yoda would immediately visit Supreme Chancellor Palpatine upon Coruscant to report the events that occurred on Geonosis. However, when Yoda met with Palpatine, together with senators such as Bail Organa and other politicians, the Supreme Chancellor didn't want to know about events related to the Separatists, their massive droid army, or even the potential for the eruption of a galactic conflict. Of course, as Darth Sidious, he knew most of that anyway, but Palpatine didn't even try to keep up appearances for his audience. Instead, Palpatine put the discussion of those important topics on hold to ask Yoda specifically about how Anakin Skywalker was doing after learning that he'd been hurt. And it wasn't a question Palpatine presented to Yoda generally. He wanted to know the specifics, asking Yoda what the exact nature of his injuries were, with Yoda having to inform the Supreme Chancellor about the loss of Anakin's right arm. Of course, Palpatine had his own machinations for revealing this information before the senators to bolster Dooku's reputation to further his own plans for the Clone War. But the novel does make it clear that there was some concern and curiosity on the part of Palpatine, as he wanted to know exactly what happened to the Jedi he planned on one day taking as his Sith apprentice. While we see some deep concern from Sidious within the Wild Space novel relating to Anakin's injury sustained on Geonosis, we do also see some agitation from Sidious within the Episode 3 novelization. Although 3 years had passed, Dooku's actions on Geonosis hadn't been forgotten by Sidious. When discussing their plans for bringing about an end to the Clone War upon the Invisible Hand during the Battle of Coruscant, Dooku would initially question the value of having Anakin ally with the Sith, directly referring to the Jedi Knight's cybernetic arm. Without pausing at all, Sidious told his apprentice, quote, "Then perhaps you should have spared his real arm." Sidious's response makes it appear as though he at least thought Dooku's action was preventable, and there was a small amount of animosity by Sidious towards Dooku for potentially jeopardizing his plans for Anakin. However, although we see some concern and brief annoyance by Sidious regarding what happened to Anakin on Geonosis, the Legends lore contains a number of scenes that demonstrate the injury Anakin sustained at the end of his duel with Dooku in no way threatens Sidious's plans from his own point of view, and could be useful to bring Anakin onto the path of the dark side, demonstrating the true brutality within the Sith Order. This would allow us to conclude that Sidious wasn't as angry about the result as one might imagine. Going back to the novel The Clone Wars Wild Space, we get a scene with Darth Sidious reflecting upon the progress of Anakin following the Battle of Geonosis, now that the Clone War had erupted. In the immediate aftermath of learning about Anakin's injuries from Yoda, Sidious was confident that everything was proceeding perfectly for Anakin, confirming that his current apprentice Dooku was merely keeping the seat warm until Anakin was ready to join the Sith. Anakin's path was coming along perfectly, and Sidious felt a tremendous sense of satisfaction when thinking about his plan being brought to fruition. Despite his desire to have Yoda explain the exact nature of Anakin's injuries in the scenes immediately before this one, Sidious expressed no concern about his future apprentice or anger towards Dooku for what he did. His plan for Anakin couldn't be going better from his perspective. And we get a look at exactly why Anakin's injury wasn't a cause for concern to him, and why Sidious wasn't angry that Dooku, who was merely his apprentice until Anakin was ready, injured the individual Sidious had placed his hopes for the future of the Sith. As Sidious would explain to Dooku just before his duel with Anakin and Obi-Wan during the Battle of Coruscant, Anakin's cybernetic arm made him perfect, particularly in light of the fact that in the future, the Jedi would be viewed as traitors. For Sidious, it was a permanent symbol of the sacrifices Anakin had made in the conflict in his quest for peace and justice. It would be a symbol of the Jedi Knight's heroism, and because no one would be able to question his honor, integrity, and courage, it would be far easier to bring Anakin into the era of the Empire, when every other Jedi became the Empire's enemy. In short, Anakin's injury would continue to define him as a galactic hero and a leading authority within the Imperial era. But there was a lot more to it than just an example of Anakin's bravery, honor, and his reputation after the war. In a recent video, we looked at Yoda's fear that Anakin would become weaker as a result of his injury on Geonosis, as the loss of his arm meant a potential loss of midichlorians, and in turn, the loss of Anakin's connection to the Force. However, this fear was not a concern for Sidious. Even after Vader's devastating injuries on Mustafar, Sidious wasn't concerned about his apprentice's loss of power in the Force, and this would certainly have also been the case with Anakin after Geonosis. As seen within novels like Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader and Darth Plagueis, for Sidious, Anakin's injuries would have no negative effects on his power, as Sith power did not reside in the flesh but within the will of the individual. Just as Darth Malak, Darth Bane, and Darth Plagueis weren't weakened by their injuries, Sidious could be confident that while Anakin's injury was serious, it wouldn't harm the great potential he saw within him, and there would be no threat to his future plans. If anything, the loss of his arm could help push Anakin further towards the dark side. Turning briefly to the current canon lore, there's a great scene within the 2017 Darth Vader comic series that demonstrates the importance of this type of loss sustained by Anakin, and its assistance in bringing one closer to the dark side. In a training session between Vader and the Emperor's new Inquisitors, Vader's lightsaber would remove the arm of the sixth brother, with Vader then imploring the Inquisitor to get up and continue fighting, noting it was only an arm. We also see that Vader would inflict the same brutal injury on the fifth brother as well. This deeply confused the Grand Inquisitor, who protested against Vader's actions and questioned what he could possibly be teaching the Inquisitors by inflicting such injuries upon them. Vader's answer was immediate: it would teach them loss. Speaking from his own experiences, Vader knew it was a lesson that they would never forget. And perhaps most importantly, Vader was using the lesson to help prepare the Inquisitorius for their mission to hunt down the remaining Jedi survivors of Order 66, by pushing them away from their former training and lessons learned as Jedi and towards the dark side. I believe the same idea could be applied to Sidious's view of Anakin following Episode 2. We see it referenced in a way by Sidious during the film, but in the Episode 3 novelization, it's just as clear. After Anakin followed Palpatine's instructions and killed Dooku on board the Invisible Hand, the Supreme Chancellor would note that Anakin's action was only right. Dooku took his hand, and thus, he wanted revenge by taking Dooku's life, and in that revenge, Anakin had found justice. In a way, Palpatine was referencing the lesson of loss Anakin experienced, as his injury on Geonosis furthered his desire for revenge against Dooku, which of course brought Anakin closer to the dark side, culminating in the significant step he took in killing Dooku. Sidious's lack of anger with Dooku's action in injuring Anakin during their duel speaks to the brutality of the Sith. He may have been initially concerned for Anakin and had some annoyance towards Dooku that stayed with Sidious for the remainder of the Clone War. However, Sidious knew the injury could ultimately be used to help bring Anakin into the era of the Empire as a galactic hero. There was no fear that Anakin's power might be diminished, and Anakin's defeat would help to serve as a lesson that only brought him closer to the dark side. In this way, Sidious confirmed that his plans for Anakin were still proceeding perfectly after the Battle of Geonosis. All of this would have tempered any anger Sidious had towards Dooku for his actions in injuring Anakin, particularly since he had long known that his master Sidious wanted to ultimately bring the Jedi Knight into an alliance with the Sith. So there we have it, how Sidious reacted to Dooku injuring Anakin on Geonosis as seen within the Legends lore. Thank you very much to all of the Patreon members of Star Wars Reading Club, as your support is so greatly appreciated. You can find all of our social media links and a link to our Star Wars gaming channel in the description below for updates and even more Star Wars content. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions. Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. If not for me... For the Grand Inquisitor.